The final but never-ending fantasy jumps into the 16-bit world of the Super Nintendo after an up-and-down trilogy on the NES. I'm playing on the North American release Final Fantasy II, and thanks Square for making me explain numbers in every Final Fantasy video. This is officially Final Fantasy IV, as Japan has always known it. Sorry Europe, you still didn't get a Final Fantasy game. The Super Nintendo's power brought better visuals and sounds. The black title screen, albeit with a shiny logo, isn't representative of those visuals. The music is almost instantly impactful on the other hand. The classic title music is used once again, now extended with an orchestral feel. It's near devastatingly beautiful after the simple beeps and boops on the NES. From the title screen, the game takes you straight into a cutscene. For the first time in the series, we don't begin by naming characters. An army led by their captain Cecil flies their airship into an unwelcoming town to steal the town's crystal, and they'll capture anyone who gets in their way. Cecil doesn't seem too happy about what he's doing. This isn't like the king he's always worked for. He works up the courage to ask the king why they're hurting innocent people, and it backfires as he gets demoted on the spot. It's a long intro, especially when you consider that the older games would throw you into the action. I get it though, you have to show off some of the shiny new console power in your cutscenes, and the story needed an introduction like this without any gameplay. Your first controlled movement is exploring Castle Baron as Cecil in this suddenly sinister kingdom. You can find items in the castle, and you can visit the prisons to see the people you've made very unhappy. The most important thing is meeting characters like Cid and Rosa, who will continue to have big roles later. The first quest the next day is to head to the village Mist with a package, and Cecil's best friend Kane has been ordered to go with him after a demotion of his own for defending Cecil. But first, before you get to see the overworld, the game has to let you know the prologue is over. Another fantastic rendition of an old Final Fantasy theme, in fact the theme of Final Fantasy, but at this point I just wanted to get started. Couldn't this theme have waited? Players experienced meaningful battles in Final Fantasy I before this theme hit them with that feeling of it's only just beginning now, and Japan experienced that again with Final Fantasy III. I wouldn't dream of knocking this theme for what it is. The impact, however, is mistimed in this game. Alright, here we go, let's have some meaningful battles of our own. Ooh, a town. Let's stop here first. Okay, obviously you don't have to do this, but if you're familiar with the series, it makes sense to take advantage of the towns before getting roughed up in battles. There isn't much to buy in your first town visit since your two characters are pre-equipped with suitable weapons and armor. On top of the expected shops and inns, each town has a training room where several characters give their advice. The advice doesn't change with each town. You should also find a naming way who you can talk with to change your characters' names. In an unusual turn of events, I chose to keep the default names. Lastly, it's worth checking all the pots around towns or castles since they could be hiding free loot. Okay, for real this time. Cecil the Dark Knight and Kane the Dragoon head out into the open with their present for Mist. Naturally, monsters will stop them in their tracks, and they'll be pulled into battle. Hey, I like that new transition, shakily zooming in rather than flashing the screen. And look at that, a full background. Square really made the battle system more engaging in this game, not only visually, but also introducing the active time battle system. We're not just taking turns to decide what we're doing and letting the game determine the attack order in that turn. You can get attacked while making your decisions now, so you'll want to make quick decisions to give enemies fewer chances to attack. This adds a sense of urgency, and can even cause more mistakes if you panic. Although, if you really want to, you could just pause the game when you're not sure what to do. Every character has a waiting period before they can attack again, which varies slightly between everyone and sadly isn't indicated in-game. I'm being picky there, since that limitation didn't affect me at all. You may remember that in previous Final Fantasy games, you had 4 characters to battle with at almost all times, and here we only have 2. It serves as a good introduction to the new battle system, and there's really no need for 4 when the battles are so simple. You may also notice that the action options aren't the same between Cecil and Kane. As a Dragoon, Kane can jump high and stay off screen to avoid attacks and deal extra damage when he lands on an enemy. Dark Knight Cecil has the Darkness ability, which I never used, oops. These won't be our only characters in this game. On their way to Mist, they must pass through a cave, encountering new enemies and occasional treasures. A spooky voice tells them to turn back, but they ignore it. That's the voice of the Mist Dragon, a dragon both from the Town of Mist and Maid of Mist, which will now defend the cave's exit. This also marks the introduction of bosses taking multiple forms, reacting differently in each form. The dragon can turn entirely into mist, and when this happens, the trick is simply not to attack. The game helpfully adds text explaining this when you try to attack, making this a good tutorial boss taking advantage of the new active time battle system. Our heroes get to Mist and, oh, they really aren't heroes, are they? The package opens automatically and the town goes up in flames. First they were obeying suspicious orders, and now they've been outright tricked. This town is where the summoners lived, and now only a girl remains. Somewhat understandably, she attempts to destroy Cecil and Kane disappears in the attack, while she knocks herself unconscious. Cecil is still interested in gaining her trust back, and he defends her when the decidedly evil Empire of Baron arrives to finish her off. And that's an abridged version of how Cecil and the young summoner Rydia started fighting side by side. Cecil has gone from leading Baron's fleets to rebelling against the kingdom. He has more than just Rydia on his side though. Some of the characters that get added along the way are originally from Baron, like Rosa and Cid. Others kind of just happen to be on your path, but they join you because something is clearly wrong with Baron. A maximum of 5 characters are in your party at a time, which is a new high in the series. This can be less helpful than you would think, since there are times when you're just waiting to use one character's attack out of the 5. You may be forced to rethink your strategy at this time if you need to heal, which is nice. However, that implies you're at a part of the game that actually has any strategy. This is my biggest gripe with this game. It takes a long time for difficult battles to show up, and there's no real strategy. At this point in time, North America's 2 Final Fantasy titles have a similar problem with slowness at or near the beginning of the game. In this case, you feel like you're progressing all the time, but you rarely have to change your battle tactics, and even if you do, there isn't any real danger. This game is easy. I will say the low difficulty makes the game a good introduction point into the series, but the shine of the new battle system almost falls flat with so little strategy. Final Fantasy IV isn't at its best until near the end, so I view it more critically than Final Fantasy I, which also began slowly. Even later in the game, there are some battles that serve no purpose other than wasting your time, from what I can tell. When the game could throw some more threatening enemies at you, you'll instead be stuck with a big group of bats, repeatedly using the vampire attack. It constantly drains its target's HP, which sounds worse than it is, because at this point you should have a lot of HP to spare. All it does is make you use a couple more healing items in between battles without causing any panic or strategy changes during the fight. Don't even get me started on Toad Lady and her group of mini-toads either. In a dungeon that successfully causes some panic otherwise, no one actually gets hurt in this fight. Their attacks merely turn some of your party into toads. The enemy toads are worthless without their leader, another battle that simply wasted time. There were certainly elements about this game that irked me enough to rant about them, but there's plenty of good in this game. We've already established that I wish it became good sooner, but the initial plot is engaging enough. The positive of the plot is that it's always easy to follow, another thing that makes this game a good choice for a first Final Fantasy. It is also a little ridiculous as it goes on. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, so let's talk about the bigger parts. You discover that Baron's king is in fact not himself. Well, no, he's not entirely an imposter, but he is seemingly under the control of Golbez. In the prologue, Cecil led their Red Wings army to take a crystal from the mage's town Mysidia, and Golbez is after all the crystals for their elemental powers. There are 4 of them, representing earth, fire, wind, and water. Wow, where have I heard that before? Couldn't possibly be in 2 of the previous games in the series. I do enjoy that Cecil has to gain Mysidia's trust back after he loses the rest of the party in a tragic encounter with Leviathan. Leviathan. In order to prove himself and leave his Dark Knight self behind, Cecil must become a paladin on Mount Ordeals, where no one has ever returned from. Under the supervision of the young mages Palom and Porom, and a surprise reunion with another great sage, the New Look party encounters the Earth Elemental Fiend on the summit. Yes, of course we have the elemental bosses. To be fair, I have no objections to fighting elemental bosses again, it's the crystal plot I could do without. They all appear in rather strange conditions though, and I wish they had environments of their own rather than appearing just to get in Cecil's way. On top of being a recycled idea, the crystal plot just gets silly. Everyone trusts Cecil and his party to go save a crystal before Baron's empire gets there, and they always return empty-handed. Eventually, you're informed about the dark crystals. If you can collect them all, you can use them to stop the light crystal's power. They're found in the underground, where all the dwarves live, and the dwarves task you with protecting their crystal. Seems like the Empire already knew about these crystals too, though. The attempt to protect the crystal is unsuccessful, but the dwarves will trust you to save another one. That won't go too well either, and although the dwarves could probably find someone else to fight the evil, they'll send you back out there again. The player should almost never trust the parts of the plot involving tragic losses too. You thought you lost your friends in the Leviathan attack, but they'll all come back. Rydia has her own story of becoming a true summoner and being raised by creatures you would ordinarily think of as monsters. That isn't too egregious, since there was a lot of confusion at sea with Leviathan, but then we get to Cid, who literally jumps out of his airship holding a bomb to seal off access to the underground. He's dead from the explosion and hitting the ground too hard, surely. Unfortunately, his sacrifice wasn't 100% successful either, as our remaining heroes will fall into a trap in the Tower of Babil, a tower with parts above ground and underground. So, they'll be stuck underground after that, where they'll discover that the dwarves have been caring for a very alive Cid. Yeah, I can't stop bringing up all the silly things in this game. There really are a lot of them. At this point though, I started enjoying the game a lot more, thankfully. We had a slow beginning while waiting for the strategy to show up, and this middle section, while more engaging, spent far too much time in the Tower of Babil. Seriously, 3 different parts of that tower? In any case, the contrast of the underground was nice from the first time it was introduced, and I was glad to see it again. The dwarves kept trusting my party, and even through all the flaws in the adventure so far, I found myself getting attached to my party too. The underground had a lot of optional areas to explore, which was fun. It let me see new battles that I generally thought were good, certainly more interesting than before. Not you, Toad Lady. I never had to stop and grind for levels, which is a big plus, and exploring these additional caves helped me keep my levels at a good place. There were also plenty of weapons and armor upgrades, and interestingly enough, the whole game seemed to force exploration for finding these more often. There were surprisingly few times I bought new gear at shops, so money was rarely a problem. And finally, how could I bring up this underground exploration without mentioning the Land of Summons? This was where Rydia spent her time away from your party, as she was training to summon more creatures, which you can use in your battles. In this side quest, you can now battle the King and Queen summons to gain their power as well. Outside of this, I'd say that the dungeon themes mostly felt generic, but the game makes up for this by having the contrast of the overworld and underground, and a secret third area, the Second Moon. I was surprised to learn that this game canonically takes place on Earth, at a time when there were 2 moons. Golbez is taking the power of the light and dark crystals to the moon, and you'll get to go there too, using the legendary airship Lunar Whale. The developers made it more of a creepy place than a fun place, which I actually liked. I also liked that this was the first time the game felt hard. This is what Final Fantasy is all about, fighting monsters that genuinely have a chance to win. Cecil learns from Fusoya the Lunarian that his father was from the moon too. But he also had a brother, Golbez. This reveal was good, I will admit. Golbez didn't seem comfortable attacking Cecil before, and as it turns out, those were his real thoughts getting in the way while he was under someone else's control. These traditional RPG plots having mystery true villains can be completely generic, but the extra layer with Golbez was nice. Following a brief trip back to Earth, the game concludes underneath the moon in the dungeon called the Lunar Subterrane. Not only is it hard, I even felt underleveled for the first time in the game. I think I missed some extra exploration opportunities, as I didn't think to explore the main overworld after exploring the underground, and if there was anything optional on the moon, I didn't find it. I know I missed at least one more summon for Rydia. Nevertheless, I mostly enjoyed the challenge that came with the feeling of being underleveled. I was surprised by how long this dungeon was, although I shouldn't have been, considering the previous game's final dungeon. Fortunately, you can save in here. I hadn't yet mentioned the workaround introduced in this game, allowing you to save in dungeons. Occasionally, you'll come across save circles where you can use items like tents or cabins to replenish HP and MP, as well as save your game. Generally, you shouldn't have to wait more than 30 minutes between your chances to save, although they were definitely further apart under the moon. Now it's time for a quick interlude featuring generic JRPG plot device number 74. Golbez and Fusoya went ahead of your party, and you arrive in time to see them teaming up to take down Zemus, the evil Lunarian mastermind. They think they win until a new version of Zemus is reborn, formed purely with his hatred, now called Zeromus. Well, that's cute. He utterly destroys Golbez and Fusoya in the rematch and almost wipes your party, but it's okay because the power of the friends you made along the way will give you the strength you need. Not the first time the series had used that last part in particular, and many RPGs kept doing it for some reason. Well, the actual final boss is pretty decent. None of them have been spectacular in the series so far, so Zeromus takes the top spot for me easily. While he typically only uses the same attack, Big Bang, the active time battle system helps to make this better. Okay, it can't stop the flashing lights that happen every time, so I'm not going to show the process of the attack. The game changer is that Zeromus shakes soon before he uses this move, giving you a chance to change your strategy in the moment. Maybe you need to quickly heal because of all the damage it causes. Alternatively, you can force him to change his attacks if you hit him with magic. Like many other enemies in the game, Zeromus counters certain attacks by immediately using a different move. I enjoyed the layers of complexity to this fight, and more than anything, it was a big endurance test because he has a lot of HP. I also hope YouTube will be able to keep up with the crazy background in this fight. You're rewarded with a long epilogue, including a montage of where everyone moved on to after defeating Zeromus, ending with Cecil and Rosa's wedding. It took a long time to get going, but it was a solid and satisfying ending. Even though I was missing that satisfaction factor for too much of the game, I felt connected to the characters, getting them where they needed to be. The silly plot didn't ruin any of that, despite my party making the same mistakes. They're just a bunch of lovable dorks. Now, I'm considering the sense of satisfaction in my score as I compare it with other games of the series. Although Final Fantasy I likes to break itself, I simply got more satisfaction out of that game, so I conclude that the fourth game wasn't as good. Therefore, my final score for Final Fantasy IV will be 7.3 out of 10. The easy nature makes this a good starting point in the series if you've never played any of the games and want to try it out. Although my entry point to the series was with the NES originals, I think the active time battle system is more interesting for a first experience compared with a random turn-based system. The best version to play is not the SNES version though. My first time playing this game was the Pixel remaster on PC, also available on modern consoles. I can recommend it, and while I don't remember much, I recall it flowing better, and I know I preferred it to Final Fantasy I's remaster. I guess the remake added satisfaction too. There are also older remakes on GBA and PSP with some added content, and a 3D reimagining originally made for DS. I can't speak from experience, but the consensus is that the 3D version is, contrarily, very hard. North America's Final Fantasy II was the front cover game of Nintendo Power in November 1991 and received the best scores of the month, totaling 17.1 out of 20. Electronic Gaming Monthly had a couple reviewers that admitted they don't enjoy RPGs, but called this game one of the best. Even with a tough crowd, its average score was 8 out of 10. Famitsu reportedly gave Final Fantasy IV an average of 9, which I can't confirm since the sources are sadly missing. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? What rating would you give Final Fantasy IV for the SNES, initially released in 1991? Subscribe to help me battle the algorithm. As ever, thank you for watching, and please continue to be your own unique self. You guys, snuggled between my two favorite boys.